My husband's mistress smirked as she told me they'd be moving into their dream house together. She didn't know that by sunrise, I'd already set the wheels in motion to become its rightful owner. The text message came at 2:47 a.m., jolting me awake from an already restless sleep. The bright screen illuminated our bedroom, no, my bedroom now, as I read the words that would change everything. Elizabeth, I hope you understand that Robert and I are meant to be together. We're closing on the Victorian mansion next week. The one you always dreamed about. He says you're too practical to appreciate its beauty anyway. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled as I stared at the message from Veronica, the woman who'd been my interior design client just 6 months ago. The woman who'd sat in my kitchen drinking my coffee, admiring my taste, all while plotting to steal my husband of 15 years, the Victorian mansion. Of course it had to be that house, the historic Marshall property on Maple Grove that Robert and I had dreamed of owning since we first married. We'd drive by it every Sunday, planning renovations, imagining our future children running through its sprawling gardens. When we make it big, he'd always say, squeezing my hand, this will be our forever home. I'd been the one who found the investment opportunities that had grown Robert's small inheritance into a real estate empire. I'd spent countless nights researching properties, analyzing market trends, and building relationships with the right people. All while he played the charismatic face of our success, charming clients and taking credit for my financial strategies. But that house, that magnificent Victorian with its intricate woodwork and secret passages, had always been our shared dream. Now he planned to live there with her. My phone buzzed again, another message from Veronica. He says you can keep the beach condo, consider it a parting gift. After all, you did help him build his business, even if you were just the supportive wife. Just the supportive wife. The words hit me like a physical blow, forcing the air from my lungs. Memories flooded my mind. The nights I'd stayed up late reviewing contracts while Robert slept soundly beside me. The dinner parties where I'd quietly corrected his financial projections while playing the role of the doting spouse. The countless times I'd swallowed my pride as he introduced me as my beautiful wife, rather than my business partner. I got out of bed, my bare feet silent against the cold hardwood floor. Walking to the window, I could see the lights of the city below, twinkling like stars fallen to earth. Somewhere out there, Robert and Veronica were probably celebrating their future together, laughing about how easily they'd pushed me aside. But they didn't know me. Not really. Robert had forgotten that I was the one who'd structured all our real estate deals. I was the one who knew every clause, every contingency, every loophole in our contracts. He'd been too busy playing the successful businessman to notice that I'd been protecting myself all along. My hands stopped shaking as a plan began to form in my mind. The Victorian mansion wasn't just his dream, it was mine. And I had spent too many years being underestimated to let them take it from me now. I opened my laptop, the soft glow of the screen casting shadows on the wall. The Marshall Properties listing was still in my browser history. I'd been monitoring it for years, waiting for the perfect moment. Now, as I reviewed the sale conditions and ownership structures, a smile spread across my face. Robert had always teased me for being too cautious, too detail-oriented. Live a little, he'd say, rolling his eyes at my insistence on reading every contract thoroughly. Trust me to handle the business side of things, but I hadn't trusted him. Not completely. And I'd made sure that every major property deal we'd ever done had certain provisions. Provisions that Robert, in his arrogance, had never bothered to read. I picked up my phone again, this time to make a call. The line rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. Margaret? It's Elizabeth. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need your legal expertise. Remember that contingency clause we discussed last year? The one about property acquisition rights? I think it's time to put it to use. Margaret, my friend and our corporate attorney, was silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice gaining clarity as she realized what I was suggesting. The Marshall property? Elizabeth, are you sure about this? More sure than I've ever been, I replied, watching the city lights flicker below. They want to make me the fool in their love story, but I think it's time to remind them who really built this empire. As I ended the call, another message from Veronica lit up my phone. Don't worry, we'll take good care of your dream house. Maybe we'll even invite you to the housewarming party. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my safe and pulled out a thick folder, documents I'd hoped I'd never need to use. But Robert's betrayal had changed everything. By the time the sun rose over the city, I would set in motion a plan that would remind them both that some dreams come with a price. Looking at my reflection in the window, I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. Gone was the soft, accommodating wife who had stood in Robert's shadow for so long. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who refused to be cast aside. They thought they were writing a love story. They didn't realize they were walking into a carefully laid trap, one that had been years in the making, and by the time they figured it out, it would be too late. The Victorian mansion would have its rightful owner, and it wouldn't be them. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold as I sat at my desk, surrounded by years of carefully maintained documents. My hands moved methodically, sorting through papers that told the story of our real estate empire. An empire that Robert thought he'd built alone. My coffee had gone cold, untouched since I'd made it 3 hours ago. I couldn't eat, couldn't drink, couldn't do anything but focus on the task at hand. The initial shock of Veronica's messages had crystallized into something harder, something colder, something that would fuel the long days ahead. The printer hummed to life as I began making copies of everything. Every contract, every deed, every handwritten note that proved my involvement in our business dealings. Robert had always laughed at my obsessive record-keeping. "Elizabeth, darling," he'd say, his voice dripping with condescension. "That's what we have accountants for." But I knew better. I'd watched my mother lose everything in her divorce, had seen how easily a husband could erase a wife's contributions when there was no paper trail. I'd vowed never to let that happen to me, and now my diligence would be my salvation. My phone buzzed again, another message from Veronica. I ignored it, focusing instead on the document in front of me. It was the original proposal for the Victorian mansion's purchase, drafted 3 years ago when the property first caught our eye. Robert had dismissed it then, claiming the timing wasn't right. Now I understood why. He'd been waiting to buy it with her. The sound of my laptop chiming drew my attention. An email from Margaret sent at 5:47 a.m. "Elizabeth, I've reviewed the contingency clauses. They're solid. Meet me at my office at 9 a.m. Bring everything you have on the Marshall property and your joint ventures with Robert. And Elizabeth? Don't tell anyone about this. Not yet. Margaret." I took a deep breath, feeling the first glimmer of hope since that devastating text message. Margaret had been more than our corporate attorney. She'd been my silent guardian, helping me insert protective clauses into contracts that Robert was too arrogant to read carefully. "Just standard legal language," she'd tell him, knowing he'd never bother to verify. My phone rang, displaying Robert's name. My heart thundered in my chest, but my hands remained steady. Let it ring. Let him wonder. Let him start to feel the first stirrings of unease. Instead of answering, I walked to our bedroom, my bedroom, and opened the walk-in closet. Behind Robert's carefully arranged row of designer suits, I found what I was looking for, a small safe, hidden behind a false panel. He'd never known about it. Inside were the original deeds to our first 3 properties, the ones we'd bought before his ego had outgrown our marriage. Those properties had been my idea, purchased with money I'd inherited from my grandmother. Robert had been hesitant, calling real estate investment too risky, but I'd insisted, and those investments had laid the foundation for everything that followed. Of course, now he told a different story, one where he was the visionary, and I was just the supportive wife who'd gotten lucky. The safe also contained something else, a USB drive with recordings of every major business meeting we'd had in the, last 5 years. Robert had insisted on recording them for reference purposes, never realizing I kept my own copies. Copies that showed clearly who had really been making the decisions, structuring the deals, building the relationships that had made us successful. I glanced at the clock. 7:23 a.m. Time to get ready for my meeting with Margaret. As I stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash over me, I allowed myself to really feel the pain for the first time. The betrayal cut deep, not just because Robert had found someone else, but because he'd chosen to give her the one thing that had been our shared dream. The Victorian mansion wasn't just a house. It was the physical manifestation of every sacrifice I'd made, every compromise, every moment I'd swallowed my pride and let Robert take credit for my work. It represented the life we'd planned together, the future we'd mapped out on lazy Sunday afternoons. But as I dried off and began applying my makeup, I saw something different in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken. She was transforming. The pain of betrayal was becoming something else. A steely determination that would make Robert regret every time he'd underestimated me. I dressed carefully, choosing a crisp, white blazer and black pencil skirt. Power colors, Margaret called them. As I fastened my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one Robert had tried to replace with flashier jewelry, my phone buzzed with another message. This time from Sophie, my younger sister. Just saw Robert and some woman at Bellamy's. Looking pretty. Cozy. What's going on, Liz? Bellamy's, our favorite breakfast spot. The place where we'd celebrated every major business success, where we'd first discussed buying the Victorian mansion. Of course he'd take Veronica there. He was rewriting our history, replacing me with her in every meaningful location we'd shared. Typed back a quick response. Come over tonight. I'll explain everything. Sophie would understand. She'd been the one who'd encouraged me to protect myself legally, who'd seen through Robert's charming facade years before I had. He takes too much credit, she'd warned me. One day, he'll try to take it all. As I gathered my documents and prepared to leave for Margaret's office, my phone rang again. Robert. This time, I answered. Elizabeth? His voice was casual, as if nothing had changed. As if he hadn't just blown up our entire life. We need to talk. Yes, I replied, my voice steady. We do, but not now. I have a meeting. A meeting? With who? The hint of concern in his voice was satisfying. Robert had always underestimated my connections, my relationships with the people who really made our business run. You'll find out. Soon enough. I ended the call before he could respond. Stepping into the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished doors. I looked different somehow, stronger. The woman who had received that text message at 2:47 a.m. was gone. In her place stood someone who refused to be written out of her own story. The Victorian mansion had always been our dream. Now it would become my reality. And Robert? Robert was about to learn that some dreams come at a very high price. Margaret's law office occupied the entire top floor of a sleek downtown high-rise, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city below. As I sat in her private conference room, spreading out documents across the polished mahogany table, I could see the Victorian mansion's distinctive roofline in the distance. It stood proud against the morning sky, its weathered brick and ornate, turrets a stark contrast to the modern glass and steel structures surrounding it. Start from the beginning, Margaret said, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she examined the papers before her. Tell me everything about the property's history. I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. The Marshall property has been in trust since Old Man Marshall died in 2008. His children couldn't agree on what to do with it, so it's been tied up in legal limbo for years. Robert and I have had our eye on it since we married. We'd drive by every Sunday, planning renovations, dreaming about raising a family there. Margaret nodded, making notes in her leather-bound notebook. And the trust? What are its terms? That's where it gets interesting, I replied, pulling out a highlighted document. The trust stipulates that the property can only be sold to someone who will preserve its historical integrity. Any buyer has to submit detailed renovation plans that respect the original architecture. Robert? I paused, swallowing hard. Robert never had the patience for that kind of detail work, but I spent years researching the house's history, documenting every original feature, creating preservation plans. Which you submitted under your own name, Margaret said, a slight smile playing at her lips. Yes. Robert thought it was just a hobby, my obsession with the house's history. He never bothered to read the trust requirements carefully. Never realized that I was positioning myself as the ideal buyer. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. And now he's trying to buy it with Veronica. Has he submitted any renovation plans? I shook my head. No. The realtor told me they're planning to modernize everything. Gut renovations. Veronica's an interior designer. She specializes in contemporary minimalism. She'll destroy everything that makes the house special. Perfect, Margaret said, her smile widening. That's our angle. But Elizabeth, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back. I stood up, walking to the window. The Victorian mansion caught the morning light, its stained glass windows glinting like jewels. Do you know what Robert said to me the last time we drove past that house? He said, "One day, baby, I'll give you everything you deserve." Well, I'm done waiting for him to give me anything. I'm taking what's rightfully mine. Margaret joined me at the window, her reflection serious in the glass. Then let's talk strategy. First, we need to secure your financial position. Robert's going to try to move assets when he realizes what's happening. Already handled, I said, returning to the table and pulling out another folder. Remember those routine property transfers we did last year? The ones Robert signed without reading because he was too busy planning his weekend golf trips? Margaret's eyebrows rose as she reviewed the documents. You transferred partial ownership of your 3 most profitable properties into a separate LLC under your grandmother's maiden name. Robert always said I was too cautious, too focused on contingency plans. He never understood that I learned from watching my mother lose everything in her divorce. I wasn't about to let that happen to me. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Liz, Robert just called me asking questions about your schedule. Says he can't reach you. What's going on? I showed the message to Margaret, who frowned. He's getting nervous. Good. But we need to move fast. The Marshall property goes on the market next week. Have you spoken to the trust administrators? Better, I replied, pulling out one final document. I had lunch with Sarah Marshall last month. Robert never bothered to cultivate a relationship with the family, but I've spent years building connections. Sarah's particularly concerned about preserving her father's legacy. When I showed her my renovation plans, "You already have an inside track," Margaret finished, nodding approvingly. But Elizabeth, what about the money? The Marshall property isn't cheap, and Robert will try to block your access to joint funds. I allowed myself a small smile. Remember that real estate app Robert's been bragging about? The one that's supposedly going to revolutionize the industry? The one you actually developed while he took the credit? Exactly. What Robert doesn't know is that I retained the intellectual property rights. In my name only. The app launches next month, and we already have interested buyers, major ones. Margaret whistled low. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? Not this specifically, I admitted, sinking back into my chair. I never thought Robert would betray me like this, but I always knew I needed to protect myself. I watched too many women in my mother's generation lose everything because they trusted their husbands to do the right thing. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Veronica. Robert says you're not answering his calls. Don't make this difficult, Elizabeth. You knew this was coming. Let us have our happiness. The audacity of her words made my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady as I read the message to Margaret. They think I'm just going to roll over. Let them take everything I built. They have no idea what's coming, Margaret said, gathering the documents into neat piles. But Elizabeth, we need to discuss something else. The emotional cost. Are you ready for what this will do to your relationship with Robert? With your social circle? I thought about all the dinner parties, the charity galas, the country club, events where I'd played the role of the supportive wife, where I'd smiled and nodded as Robert took credit for my ideas, my work, my success. Our social circle? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the people who've been watching Robert parade Veronica around for months without telling me? The ones who probably pitied poor, clueless Elizabeth while her husband fell in love with someone else? No, I'm not worried about them. Margaret's expression softened. And what about the house itself? Is it worth all this? I turned back to the window, to the Victorian mansion standing proud against the sky. It's not just about the house, Margaret. It's about everything it represents. Every dream Robert promised to make come true. Every sacrifice I made to build our success. Every time I swallowed my pride and let him take credit for my work. That house is my redemption story. Then let's make it happen, Margaret said, reaching for her phone. I'll call the trust administrators now, but Elizabeth? She paused, making sure she had my full attention. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Robert won't go down without a fight. I thought about the text messages from Veronica, about Robert taking her to our special places, about them planning to live in my dream house. My voice was steel when I replied, Good, because neither will I. As Margaret made her calls, I pulled out my own phone and finally typed a response to Veronica. Enjoy house hunting with Robert, but I'd hold off on ordering any furniture if I were you. Then I blocked both their numbers and turned to the task at hand. By the time Robert realized what was happening, it would be too late. The Victorian mansion would have its rightful owner, and it wouldn't be the man who'd broken every promise he'd ever made to me. It would be the woman who'd been underestimated for far too long. The next 48 hours became a blur of strategic meetings and careful information gathering. After leaving Margaret's office, I found myself sitting in a quiet corner of the Historical Society's archives, surrounded by dusty files and faded photographs of the Victorian mansion. Every detail about the house's history could be valuable ammunition in the battle ahead. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly archivist said, placing another stack of documents on my table. I've found those original blueprints you requested. And something else that might interest you. Old Mr. Marshall's personal journals. I looked up from my notes, intrigued. His journals? Yes, she smiled, her eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wrote extensively about his wishes for the house's future, quite specific about the type of owner he hoped would take over. Someone who would understand the soul of the place, not just its monetary value. Perfect. More ammunition for my case with the trust administrators. As I carefully photographed each page, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Just left lunch. With Louisa. You won't believe what she told me about Veronica's past design projects. Louisa had been my friend since college, and now worked for one of the city's most prestigious architectural firms. If anyone knew about Veronica's professional reputation, it would be her. I quickly typed back, "Tell me everything." While waiting for Sophie's response, I continued my research. The Victorian mansion's history unfolded before me like a novel. Every renovation, every careful preservation effort, every detail that made it unique. Robert had never understood my fascination with the house's past, but now that knowledge would become my weapon. Sophie's next message made me sit up straight. Veronica's last 3 historical renovations were disasters. She completely gutted period features, ignored preservation guidelines. One project got shut down by the Historical Commission. Louisa has photos. I smiled grimly. The trust administrators would be very interested in that information. But I needed to understand exactly what Robert and Veronica were planning for the house. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a call from Noah, our regular contractor. I had texted him earlier, asking about any recent consultations for the Marshall property. "Elizabeth?" he said when I answered, his voice concerned. "I just got off the phone with Robert. He and some designer want to completely modernize the Marshall house. We're talking gutted interiors, expanded windows, demolished walls, basically destroying everything that makes it historic." "And what did you tell him?" I asked, my hand tightening around the phone. Told him I'd need to review the trust requirements first. "Elizabeth." He didn't sound like himself. When I mentioned running things by you, he got angry. Said you weren't involved anymore. I took a deep breath, pushing down the hurt those words caused. "Thank you, Noah. I need copies of any plans they send you. And Noah? Robert doesn't need to know we spoke." "Of course not," he replied firmly. "I haven't forgotten who really runs this business. Never have." After ending the call, I turned back to the archives with renewed purpose. Every detail I gathered was another piece of armor, another weapon in my arsenal. Robert and Veronica thought they were dealing with a heartbroken wife too shattered to fight back. They had no idea what was coming. By late afternoon, I had compiled a comprehensive file on the house's historical significance. But I needed more than just architectural details. I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. A text from Margaret provided the next piece of the puzzle. "Just heard from my contact at the bank. Robert tried to access your joint business account. They flagged it per our earlier instructions. He's not happy." I could imagine. Robert had always been careless with financial details, assuming I would handle everything while he played the charming businessman. Now that carelessness would cost him. As I packed up my research materials, another message came through, this time from Sarah Marshall. "Elizabeth? Just had the strangest meeting with Robert and his friend. Their renovation plans are concerning. Can we talk? Dinner tonight?" I suggested. "My treat." Sarah's reply was immediate. 7 p.m. at Augustine's? Augustine's was perfect, quiet, discreet, and coincidentally where Robert had first told me about Veronica. "She's just a client," he had said, not meeting my eyes. Stop being paranoid. I arrived at the restaurant early, choosing a secluded booth where we wouldn't be overheard. Sarah arrived precisely at 7, her artist's portfolio tucked under her arm. Like me, she had a deep emotional connection to the Victorian mansion. It had been her childhood home. "I knew something was wrong as soon as they started talking," Sarah said, spreading out their proposed renovation plans. "They want to bring it into the modern era. Remove all the original woodwork, expand the rooms, add floor-to-ceiling windows." Veronica kept talking about her vision for the space. I examined the plans, my heart sinking at the proposed changes. Everything that made the house special would be destroyed. "And Robert?" Sarah's expression hardened. He seemed different, dismissive of the house's history. When I mentioned your restoration proposals from last year, he actually laughed. Said something about moving forward, not staying stuck in the past. Moving forward. Just like he was moving forward with Veronica, erasing our history together as easily as they planned to erase the house's character. "Sarah," I said carefully, What if I told you I had a different plan for the house? One that would preserve everything your father loved about it? She leaned forward, interested. The plans you showed me last month? The ones with the detailed restoration proposals? Yes, but there's more. I pulled out my own portfolio, showing her the additional research I'd gathered. I want to register the house as a historical landmark, create a foundation to ensure it's protected forever. Sarah's eyes lit up as she reviewed my proposals. This is exactly what Dad would have wanted. But Elizabeth, can you afford it? I know the asking price is substantial. I smiled, thinking of the app launch, the protected assets, the careful plans I'd laid. Let's just say I've been preparing for this longer than anyone realizes. As we finished dinner, Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'll speak to the other trust administrators tomorrow. They need to see these plans, and they need to know about Veronica's history with historical properties. I returned home late that night, my mind racing with all the information I'd gathered. Settling into my home office, I began organizing everything into clear, strategic categories: the house's historical documentation, Veronica's questionable renovation history, Robert's financial maneuvers, the trust requirements. A new text message lit up my phone, a number I didn't recognize. Elizabeth, it's Brian from the Historical Commission. Heard you're interested in the Marshall property. We should talk about your landmark registration proposal and about some concerns we have regarding recent renovation submissions. Another ally. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Worked late into the night, building my case piece by piece. Every document, every photo, every testimony would serve a purpose. Robert and Veronica thought they were planning their dream home, but they had no idea they were walking into a carefully laid trap. The Victorian mansion had stood for over a century, its walls holding countless stories of love, loss, and redemption. Soon it would hold one more: the story of a woman who refused to let her dreams be stolen, who fought back with intelligence and determination instead of anger and bitterness. Let Robert and Veronica plan their modern renovations. Let them dream about their future in that house. By the time I was done, they would learn that some dreams come with consequences, and some battles are lost before they even begin. The morning sun streamed through Margaret's office windows as we laid out our battle plan. The conference room table had become a war room, covered with documents, legal papers, and architectural plans. Sophie sat to my right, Louisa to my left, while Sarah Marshall participated via video call. Each woman represented a different piece of the puzzle I was about to put together. Let's review what we know, Margaret began, her reading glasses perched on her nose. The Marshall property goes on the market in 5 days. Robert and Veronica plan to submit their offer immediately, along with their renovation proposals, which violate at least 6 preservation guidelines, Louisa interjected, spreading out her analysis of their plans. Not to mention the specific requirements in the trust agreement. The Historical Commission would never approve these changes. I nodded, pulling out my own folder. And we have documentation of Veronica's previous renovation disasters. 3 failed historical preservation projects in the last 2 years alone. The Thompson House scandal almost got her license revoked. Sarah's voice came through the speakers, clear and determined. The other trust administrators are meeting tomorrow. They're concerned about Robert and Veronica's proposals. Elizabeth, your restoration plans are exactly what we've been hoping for. But we need to move carefully, Margaret cautioned. Robert's not stupid. Once he realizes what's happening, he'll fight back. Hard. I smiled, thinking of the text message I'd received that morning from our bank. Robert had tried to transfer a large sum from our joint business account, only to discover that his access had been restricted. He's already fighting. He just doesn't know who he's fighting yet. Sophie pulled out her laptop, opening a spreadsheet she'd prepared. I've tracked Robert and Veronica's movements for the past week. They've met with 3 different contractors, 2 interior design firms, and a landscape architect. They're planning something big. They're also getting careless, Louisa added. Veronica's been bragging to everyone in the design community about her plans for the house. She's even started ordering materials, expensive ones, non-refundable, deposits. I leaned back in my chair, processing all this information. They're overconfident. They think there's no competition for the property. No one else has submitted renovation plans that meet the trust requirements. Except you, Sarah pointed out. Your proposals have been in development for years. The Historical Commission has already preliminarily approved them. Margaret held up a hand. Let's talk timing. Elizabeth, when do you want to make your move? I pulled out a calendar marking key dates. The property listing goes live on Monday. Robert and Veronica will submit their offer first thing. They've already boasted about it to half the real estate community, but they don't know about the trust's new requirement for a formal presentation of renovation plans, which is scheduled for Wednesday, Sarah confirmed. All potential buyers must present their proposals to the full board of trustees. Dad's old friends are particularly interested in your plans for the Historical Preservation Foundation, so we let them make their move first, Sophie suggested. Let them show their hand. I nodded. Exactly. Robert's always been showy, dramatic. He'll want to make a big presentation, probably bring in some fancy digital renderings of their modern redesign. He'll think he's impressing everyone. While actually horrifying the trust administrators, Sarah added with a slight laugh. They're already worried about preserving Dad's legacy. But that's just phase 1, Margaret reminded us. Once they realize you're competing for the property, Robert will try to block you financially. We need to be ready. I pulled out another folder, this one containing documentation of the app I'd developed, the intellectual property rights I'd secured, and the interested buyers already lined up. I'm not worried about finances. The app launches next week. The timing couldn't be better. Have you heard from the potential buyers? Louisa asked. 3 major tech companies are interested. The preliminary offers. I wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. That would more than cover the asking price for the mansion, she said, with enough left over for your restoration plans. And Robert has no idea, Sophie added with a satisfied smile. He still thinks he's the business genius in the family? I thought about all the times Robert had dismissed my ideas, patronized my business acumen, treated me like a decorative accessory to his success. He's about to learn otherwise. There's something else, Louisa said, pulling out her phone. Remember? Those materials Veronica ordered? I did some digging. She used Robert's business account, the one you're still legally connected to. If they back out now, those non-refundable deposits would create a significant financial penalty, Margaret finished, which would affect their ability to secure financing for the property purchase. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed to be sure everyone understood the stakes. This isn't just about buying a house, I said, looking at each woman in turn. This is about justice, about taking back what's rightfully mine. Robert and Veronica think they can steal my dreams, erase my contributions, write me out of my own story. I won't let that happen. Sarah's voice came through the speakers, soft but firm. Dad would have wanted you to have the house, Elizabeth. He always said it needed an owner who understood its soul. Then let's make sure it gets one, Margaret said. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Here's what we need to do. First, we let Robert and Veronica submit their offer and renovation plans. Their presentation to the trust board will dig their own grave. Meanwhile, Louisa continued, I'll document every violation of historical preservation guidelines in their proposals. The Historical Commission is already concerned. This will give them concrete reasons to object. Sophie tapped her laptop. I'll keep tracking their movements, especially their meetings with contractors and suppliers. Every non-refundable deposit they make weakens their financial position. The trust board meets on Wednesday, Sarah added. Elizabeth, your presentation is scheduled for Thursday morning. By then, they'll have had time to process their horror at Robert and Veronica's plans. I looked at the calendar again, mentally marking each phase of our plan. And the app launches on Friday. By the time Robert realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it. What about the emotional cost? Margaret asked quietly. Are you ready for the fallout, the gossip, the social complications? I thought about the text messages from Veronica, about Robert taking her to our special places, about them planning to destroy everything that made the Victorian mansion special. They already think I'm the victim in their love story. Let them keep thinking that. It'll make the ending that much more satisfying. We spent the next few hours refining our strategy, addressing every possible contingency. By the time we finished, the sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the conference room table. As I gathered my documents, Sophie pulled me into a tight hug. He never deserved you, Liz, or that house. I hugged her back, feeling stronger than I had in weeks. No, he didn't, but he's about to learn exactly what he's losing. Looking out at the city skyline, I could see the Victorian mansion in the distance, its distinctive silhouette a reminder of everything I was fighting for. Robert and Veronica thought they were writing a love story, but they had no idea they were actually characters in a different kind of tale altogether. A story of justice, of redemption, of a woman taking back everything that was rightfully hers. Let them plan their modern renovations. Let them dream about their future in that house. In less than a week, they would learn that some dreams come with a price. And I was ready to make them pay it. The weekend before the Marshall property went on the market felt like the calm before a storm. I spent Saturday morning in the Victorian mansion itself, conducting what Sarah called a preliminary preservation assessment. In reality, it was my last chance to walk through the house before the chaos began. The original moldings are all intact, Sarah noted, running her hand along the intricate woodwork in the main hall. Dad was obsessive about maintaining them. Veronica wants to rip all of this out, replace it with something clean and modern. I stood in the center of the grand foyer, letting memories wash over me. How many times had Robert and I driven past this house, planning our future? How many Sunday afternoons had we spent dreaming about the life we'd build here? Now he planned to destroy everything that made it special, just like he'd destroyed our marriage. Elizabeth? Sarah's voice pulled me from my thoughts. The trust administrators are particularly interested in your plans for the library. Ah, the library. The room that had first made me fall in love with the house. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a winding wooden staircase, stained glass windows that painted the room in jewel tones when the sun hit them just right. According to their plans, Sarah continued, Veronica wants to divide it into 3 separate rooms, a home gym, a media room, and what she calls a minimal reading nook. The very thought made my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady. Show me the structural reports your father commissioned. We spent the next few hours documenting everything, every original feature, every historical detail, every element that made the Victorian mansion unique. My restoration proposals weren't just plans. They were a promise to preserve something precious. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Robert and Veronica just left the country club, overheard them bragging about their vision for the house. They're presenting to the trust board on Wednesday. Perfect. Let them be overconfident. Let them think their modern massacre of this historic home would impress the trust administrators. Later that afternoon, I met with Brian from the Historical Commission in a quiet cafe downtown. He reviewed my landmark registration proposal with growing enthusiasm. This is exactly what we've been hoping for, he said, marking notes in the margins. Your restoration plans don't just preserve the house, they honor its history. And these educational programs you're proposing. The Marshall Historical Foundation, I explained. Regular tours, workshops on historical preservation, partnerships with local schools. Making the house a living part of the community, not just a private residence, Brian nodded approvingly. The commission will support this fully, especially given the alternative proposals we've seen. I raised an eyebrow. You've reviewed Robert and Veronica's plans? Unfortunately, yes. Brian's expression darkened. Let's just say the commission has serious concerns about their approach, and given Ms. Veronica's track record with historical properties, you know about the Thompson house? That disaster? Brian shook his head. The commission hasn't forgotten. The original features she destroyed were irreplaceable. Another piece of ammunition for the battle ahead. As I left the cafe, my phone lit up with a message from Margaret. Everything's set with the bank. The moment the app launches on Friday, the funds will be ready for transfer. I smiled, thinking of Robert's recent attempts to access our joint accounts. He still had no idea about the app, about the intellectual property rights I'd secured, about the buyers already lined up. He'd been too busy with Veronica to pay attention to the business lately. Sunday morning brought a flurry of activity. Louisa arrived at my house early, carrying a thick folder of documentation about Veronica's previous renovation projects. It's worse than we thought, she said, spreading photos across my dining room table. The Thompson house was just the beginning. Look at what she did to the Wilson estate. The before and after photos were shocking. A beautiful Victorian-era home gutted and transformed into a stark, modern shell. Original features destroyed. Historical elements discarded, the soul of the house completely erased. She's already ordered similar materials for the Marshall house, Louisa continued. High-end modern fixtures, minimalist design elements. The deposits alone are substantial enough to impact their financing, I finished. And non-refundable. Sophie arrived next, bringing coffee and more intelligence from her social reconnaissance. They're planning some kind of surprise for their presentation to the trust board. Something about virtual reality renderings of their modern design concept. I could imagine Robert's smugness, his certainty that flashy technology would win over the trustees. He never did understand that some things were more valuable than modern conveniences. The rest of Sunday was spent rehearsing my own presentation. Sarah connected via video call, helping me refine every detail of my restoration proposals. Margaret reviewed the legal aspects, ensuring everything was airtight. Remember, Margaret cautioned, Robert will react badly when he realizes you're competing for the house. Be prepared for anything. I thought about Robert's temper, his hatred of being outmaneuvered. He'll try to discredit me. Paint me as the bitter ex-wife trying to ruin his happiness. Let him, Sophie said fiercely. The trust administrators don't care about his happiness. They care about the house. Monday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. I watched from my office window as the for sale sign went up in front of the Victorian mansion. Within hours, Robert and Veronica had submitted their offer. Well above asking price, just as we'd expected. They're feeling very pleased with themselves, Sarah reported after their initial meeting with the trust administrators. Veronica couldn't stop talking about their plans to bring the house into the 21st century. I spent Monday afternoon with my technical team doing final testing on the app before Friday's launch. The interested buyers had already signed preliminary agreements. By the end of the week, I would have more than enough capital to outbid Robert and Veronica. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about proving that I deserved that house more than they did, that I understood its value in a way they never could. Tuesday brought the first hint that Robert might be suspecting something. He tried to call me repeatedly, finally leaving, a voicemail that barely contained his anger. Elizabeth, what the hell is going on? The bank says I can't access our business accounts, and now I hear rumors you've been meeting with the Historical Commission? Call me back. Now. I didn't call him back. Instead, I spent the day with Brian, finalizing the landmark registration proposal. By the time Robert realized what I was doing, it would be too late to stop it. Tuesday evening, I stood in front of the Victorian mansion, watching the sun set behind its distinctive turrets. Tomorrow, Robert and Veronica would make their presentation to the trust board. They would show off their modern designs, their plans, to gut and rebuild their vision of progress at the expense of history. And then, on Thursday morning, I would show the trustees a different vision. One that honored the past while embracing the future. One that preserved the soul of the house while ensuring its place in the community. My phone buzzed with one final text from Veronica. "Heard you've been asking questions about the house. Don't waste your time, Elizabeth. Robert and I are going to transform it into something spectacular. Something better than anything you could have imagined." I smiled, thinking of the carefully laid plans, the gathered evidence, the support network I'd built. Veronica thought she was writing the next chapter of the house's story. She didn't realize she was just a minor character in mine. Let them have their moment tomorrow. Let them present their grand plans for destruction disguised as renovation. By the end of the week, they would learn that some things were worth preserving, and some dreams came with a price they weren't prepared to pay. The Victorian mansion stood silent in the gathering dusk, its windows reflecting the last light of day. Soon it would have its rightful owner, someone who understood that true value wasn't about modernization or transformation, but about honoring the beauty that was already there. Someone like me. Wednesday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that showed the Victorian mansion at its best. I sat in the back row of the trust board's meeting room, watching Robert and Veronica set up their presentation. They hadn't noticed me yet, too absorbed in their last-minute preparations. "The 3D renderings are ready," Veronica was saying, her voice carrying across the room. "Wait until they see our vision for the space. It's going to blow their minds." Robert adjusted his tie, the one I'd given him for our last anniversary, and smiled at her with the same confidence he'd once directed at me. "Trust me, by the time we're done, they'll forget all about their preservation concerns." If only they knew that Sarah had already shared their presentation with me. If only they realized that every modern improvement they planned to showcase would horrify the trust administrators, but let them have their moment. Their overconfidence would make what came next even sweeter. The room filled quickly with trust board members, historical commission representatives, and other interested parties. Brian from the historical commission caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. Margaret sat near the front, her expression neutral but her pen ready to document everything. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, standing at the podium. "We're here to review proposals for the Marshall property. First, we'll hear from Robert Thompson and Veronica Pierce about their vision for the house's future." Robert stepped forward, every inch the successful businessman. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're about to show you isn't just a renovation plan, it's a transformation, a reimagining of what this house could be." The lights dimmed, and their virtual reality presentation began. Modern renderings showed the Victorian mansion stripped of its character, its ornate features replaced with sleek minimalism. The grand staircase, gone. The original woodwork, eliminated. The library, divided and modernized. I watched the trust administrators' faces as Robert and Veronica enthusiastically detailed their plans. Watched their expressions shift from polite interest to barely concealed horror. Old Mr. Marshall's closest friend actually winced when they showed their plans for the library. "As you can see," Veronica said, gesturing at a particularly stark rendering, "we're bringing this dated space into the modern era. Clean lines, open concept, none of that heavy Victorian clutter." "The cost is substantial," Robert added, "but we're prepared to pay above asking price to realize our vision." That's when I noticed his hand shaking slightly as he changed slides. He was nervous about something. The financial arrangements, perhaps? I smiled, thinking of those non-refundable deposits Veronica had been making. The presentation continued, each new slide revealing more destruction masked as improvement. When they finally finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Are there any questions? Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. Brian raised his hand. Yes, Ms. Pierce. Could you explain how these plans align with historical preservation guidelines? Particularly given the house's pending landmark status application? Veronica's smile faltered. Pending what? The landmark status application, Brian repeated. The Historical Commission received a comprehensive proposal last week. Didn't your team review it? Robert's head snapped up. What application? Who submitted it? That was my cue. I stood, feeling every eye in the room turned toward me. I did. The color drained from Robert's face as I walked to the front of the room. Veronica's perfectly maintained composure cracked, showing the first signs of uncertainty. Elizabeth? Robert's voice was a mixture of shock and growing anger. What are you doing here? My presentation isn't until tomorrow, I said calmly. But since we're discussing the house's future, I think the trust board should have all the information available. Sarah nodded, a slight smile playing at her lips. Please, proceed. I opened my own presentation, watching as images of the house's original features filled the screen. The Marshall property isn't just a house, it's a piece of our city's history. Every detail, from the hand-carved moldings to the stained glass windows, tells a story. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out my vision. Not of destruction, but of preservation. Not of modernization, but of restoration. I showed them the educational programs I plan to implement, the community engagement initiatives, the historical preservation foundation that would ensure the house's protection for generations to come. This isn't just about buying a property, I concluded. It's about preserving a legacy, and I'm prepared to demonstrate my commitment to that preservation. Robert stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. Elizabeth, you can't afford this house. You're just trying to interfere with our plans out of spite. I smiled, pulling out my phone. Actually, Robert, you might want to check the business news. My real estate app just launched. The one you thought was just a hobby project? 3 major tech companies have been in a bidding war for it all morning. His face went pale as he grabbed his own phone, fingers frantically searching for the news. Veronica looked between us, her confidence crumbling as she realized something was very wrong. Oh, I added, and the Historical Commission might be interested in reviewing Ms. Pierce's previous renovation projects. The Thompson House disaster, in particular. Brian cleared his throat. We're already quite familiar with those incidents. They'll be taken into consideration when reviewing any proposed changes to the property. Veronica's composure finally broke. Robert, you said this would be simple. You said no one else was interested in the house. He was wrong about a lot of things, I said quietly. Including who really built our business, who really understood the value of preservation, and who really deserves to own this house. The trust board members were whispering among themselves now. Sarah stood up, her voice carrying across the room. I think we've seen enough for today. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for the final presentation and our decision. As the room began to clear, Robert grabbed my arm. How long have you been planning this? I looked down at his hand until he released me. How long have you been sleeping with Veronica? How long have you been planning to take my dream house and destroy everything that makes it special? That's not fair, Veronica interjected. We're making it better, more valuable. No, I said, gathering my materials. You're destroying its soul, just like you tried to destroy mine. But you failed at both. As I walked out of the room, I heard Veronica's voice rising in panic. Robert, what about the deposits, the custom materials I ordered? We can't back out now. I smiled, knowing that their financial house of cards was about to collapse. Tomorrow, I would present my final proposal. Tomorrow, I would show them exactly what they had underestimated. But for now, I had one more stop to make. The Victorian mansion was beautiful in the late afternoon light, its windows glowing like amber. Soon, very soon, it would have an owner who truly understood its worth. And Robert and Veronica? They were about to learn that some dreams come with a price they weren't prepared to pay. Thursday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and rose, knowing that by sunset, everything would be different. My phone had been buzzing constantly since yesterday's confrontation. Messages from Robert, from Veronica, from curious friends who'd heard rumors about what happened at the trust board meeting. "Elizabeth, please call me." Robert's latest message. "Read. We need to talk about this. You're making a huge mistake." A mistake. That's what he'd called it 15 years ago when I'd insisted on buying our first investment property. That's what he'd called it when I'd spent weekends studying real estate law instead of playing golf with his friends. That's what he'd called every decision I'd made that he couldn't control. My phone rang. "Margaret, are you ready for this?" she asked without preamble. "More than ready," I replied, adjusting my pearl necklace in the mirror. "How are they doing?" "Robert's been trying to access every account we have. The bank called twice to verify the restrictions." "And Veronica?" Margaret paused, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "The Historical Commission's review of her previous projects hit the local news this morning. Her design firm is already getting calls from concerned clients." Perfect. But that was just the beginning. I arrived at the trust board meeting room early, wanting to be settled before everyone else arrived. Sarah met me at the door, her expression barely containing her excitement. "The other trustees stayed up late, reviewing your proposal," she whispered. "Dad would have loved what you're planning to do with the house." The room filled quickly, but Robert and Veronica were noticeably absent. Just as Sarah was about to call the meeting to order, they burst. I knew Robert's typically immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled, his confidence replaced by barely contained panic. Veronica looked like she hadn't slept. Her designer outfit couldn't hide her anxiety. "Before we begin," Robert announced, his voice strained, "I need to address yesterday's situation. Elizabeth's presence here is inappropriate. She's clearly acting out of spite, trying to sabotage my future happiness." "Mr. Thompson," one of the elderly trustees interrupted, "this meeting is about the house's future, not your personal affairs. Please take your seat." I stood, walking to the podium, with my final presentation materials. The screen behind me lit up with images of the Victorian mansion's original blueprints, alongside my detailed restoration plans. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "yesterday we saw one vision for the Marshall property's future. Today, I want to show you another. Not a vision of destruction masked as progress, but one of preservation, restoration, and community engagement." For the next hour, I laid out my complete plan. The historical preservation foundation that would protect the house forever. The educational programs that would teach future generations about architectural heritage. The community events that would make the house a living part of the city's culture. The Marshall property isn't just a house, I concluded. It's a testament to craftsmanship, to history, to the understanding that some things are worth preserving. My financial offer exceeds the asking price, but more importantly, my commitment to the house's legacy is absolute. I could see Robert's face growing darker with each word. When I mentioned the financial offer, he actually flinched. Veronica was rapidly typing on her phone, likely trying to figure out how I could possibly afford this. "Ms. Thompson," Brian from the Historical Commission spoke up, "your landmark status application has already received preliminary approval. Could you tell us more about how that would integrate with your foundation plans?" Before I could answer, Robert jumped to his feet. "This is absurd. Elizabeth, where are you getting the money for this? Our business accounts are frozen." I smiled, pulling up a news article on the presentation screen. "Actually, Robert, I think you'll find that my business accounts are doing quite well. The real estate app launch exceeded all expectations. 3 rounds of bidding drove the price up considerably. The blood drained from his face as he read the headlines. The app he'd dismissed as my hobby project had just made me a fortune in my own right. That's my app, he sputtered. I'm the one who... Check the intellectual property rights. I cut in smoothly. Everything is registered in my name. All the development, all the coding, all the business relationships. While you were busy with other things, I was building my own success. Veronica stood up, her voice shrill. Robert, do something. We've already put deposits down on the renovations. We can't lose this house. About those deposits, Louisa spoke up from her seat. The Historical Commission would like to review the materials orders. Some of them seem to violate preservation guidelines, which could affect permit approvals. I watched as their perfect plan crumbled before their eyes. Every foundation they'd built their dreams on was being pulled away, piece by piece. Sarah called for the trust board's vote. I held my breath, though I already knew what was coming. One by one, the trustees voiced their decisions. The result was unanimous. The board accepts Elizabeth Thompson's proposal for the Marshall property, Sarah announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. Her commitment to preservation, combined with her foundation plans and financial offer, best serves the house's legacy and the community's interests. Robert looked like he'd been struck. This isn't over, he said, his voice shaking. I'll fight this. You'll what? I asked quietly. Use our joint funds? They're frozen. Appeal to the Historical Commission? They've seen your renovation plans. Try to outbid me? Check the business news again, Robert. The app just sold for 3 times the expected price. Veronica grabbed her things, her movements jerky with suppressed rage. This is just spite, she spat. You couldn't stand to see us happy, see us building a future in your precious dream house. I turned to her, feeling remarkably calm. No, Veronica. This is justice. You thought you could take everything from me, my husband, my dreams, my future. But you never understood what really mattered. This house doesn't need to be transformed or modernized. It needs to be preserved, protected, cherished, just like my own worth didn't need to be validated by a man who never really appreciated it. The room slowly emptied, leaving me alone with Margaret and Sarah. Through the windows, I could see Robert and Veronica having a heated argument in the parking lot. It's done, Margaret said softly. The house is yours. Sarah handed me a set of keys, the original set her father had used. Dad would be proud, she said. The house is going to someone who truly understands its value. I held the keys, feeling their weight in my hand. Through the window, I watched Robert and Veronica drive away separately, their dream of a future together crumbling like the history they'd planned to destroy. Later that evening, I stood in front of the Victorian mansion, my mansion now. The setting sun turned its windows to flame, and for a moment, I could see past the years of waiting, past the pain of betrayal, to the future I would build here. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Veronica. I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything. I smiled, thinking of the preservation plans already in motion, of the foundation that would protect this house long after we were all gone, of the dreams that couldn't be stolen by those who didn't understand their true worth. No, I whispered to the empty air. I've saved everything that matters. The Victorian mansion stood silent and strong, its generations of history protected at last by someone who understood that some things were worth preserving, some battles worth fighting, and some dreams worth protecting at any cost. The first night in the Victorian mansion was surreal. I sat in the library, my library now, surrounded by empty bookshelves and echoing spaces that would soon be filled with new memories. The moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscope shadows on the hardwood floors. Sophie. had offered to stay with me, but I needed this time alone. Time to process everything that had happened, everything that had changed. The house creaked and settled around me, its aged wood and plaster speaking in whispers of past lives and future possibilities. My phone had finally stopped buzzing with messages. The last one from Robert had been particularly desperate. "You've destroyed everything we built together. I hope you're satisfied with your revenge." But that was where he was wrong. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about justice, about preservation, about protecting something precious from those who would destroy it without understanding its true value. I walked through the room slowly, my footsteps echoing in the empty spaces. Each room held memories of dreams Robert and I had shared, dreams he'd so easily discarded for a younger woman and a modern vision that would have stripped this house of its soul. In the master bedroom, I found an old photograph tucked behind a loose piece of wallpaper. It showed the Marshall family in the 1950s, gathered in front of the fireplace for Christmas. Their faces beamed with joy, the house around them practically glowing with warmth and history. "You found it." Sarah's voice came softly from the doorway. I hadn't heard her arrive. "I thought you'd gone home," I said, carefully holding the photograph. She stepped into the room, smiling. "Dad hid photos like that all over the house. He said they were gifts for whoever would love this place enough to look closely, to care about its stories." I studied the image more carefully. The woodwork in this photo, it's exactly what Veronica wanted to tear out. "I know." Sarah moved to stand beside me. "That's why the trustees were so horrified by their presentation. They saw someone willing to erase generations of memories for the sake of modern trends." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, letting the house's peaceful atmosphere wash over us. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "I got an interesting call today," she said, "from Veronica's design firm. They're reconsidering her position after the Historical Commission's report went public. I felt a twinge of something, not quite satisfaction, not quite pity." "And Robert?" "His real estate colleagues are asking questions about the app, about who really built your business. His reputation is—" She paused diplomatically. "Shifting." I moved to the window, looking out over the garden where moonlight silvered the overgrown roses. "You know, for years I let him take credit for my work. I stayed quiet when he dismissed my ideas, when he treated me like an accessory to his success. I told myself it didn't matter as long as we were building something together. But you were really building something for yourself all along," Sarah observed. "The app, the business knowledge, the relationships with the right people. You were preparing for independence whether you realized it or not." She was right. Every late night spent coding, every careful documentation of our business dealings, every relationship I'd cultivated had been laying the groundwork for this moment. Not for revenge, but for freedom. My phone lit up with a message from Margaret. "Divorce papers are ready when you are. And Elizabeth? You did good." I smiled, remembering Robert's face when he realized just how thoroughly I'd outmaneuvered him. Not with cruelty or vindictiveness, but with careful preparation and absolute determination. "Have you seen the local paper?" Sarah asked, pulling out her tablet. "Someone leaked Veronica's previous renovation disasters. The Thompson house owners are considering legal action over the unauthorized changes she made to their historical property." "I didn't leak that," I said quietly. Sarah's eyes twinkled. "No, but Louisa might have mentioned something to someone who mentioned something to someone else. The preservation community is surprisingly well connected." I wandered back to the library, Sarah following. The moonlight through the stained glass windows created patterns that danced across the empty shelves. Soon they would be filled with books, the room restored to its former glory. "The Historical Commission approved your landmark status application," Sarah mentioned. "Record time, apparently. Brian was very enthusiastic in his recommendation. ran my hand along the original woodwork, feeling the craftsmanship that had endured for over a century. Robert never understood why I loved this house so much. He saw it as a status symbol, a canvas for Veronica's modern vision. He didn't feel its history, its character. Dad used to say that houses choose their owners, Sarah mused, that somehow the right person always ends up where they belong. A noise from outside caught our attention, a car door slamming. Through the window, we saw Veronica's distinctive sports car pulling away from the curb. On the front steps, she'd left a box. Want me to get that? Sarah offered. No, I said, straightening my shoulders. I'll do it. The night air was cool as I stepped onto the porch. The box contained items from my old life with Robert. Photos, mementos, small things I'd left behind when I moved out. On top was a note in Veronica's elegant handwriting. You won. I hope this house makes you happy. It cost me everything else. I carried the box inside, feeling its weight, not just physical, but emotional. The remnants of a life I'd thought I wanted, a life that had turned out to be built on illusions. Are you okay? Sarah asked softly. I looked around the library, at the moonlight painting stories on the walls, at the empty shelves waiting to be filled with new purpose. You know what? I really am. Later, after Sarah left, I sat in the window seat, planning the restoration that would begin tomorrow. The house creaked and settled around me, not with the foreboding of horror stories, but with the comfortable sighs of a place that knew it was finally in the right hands. My phone lit up one last time. A message from Sophie. Coming over tomorrow to help plan the restoration. Louise is bringing the historical photos, and Margaret's bringing champagne. Time to celebrate your new beginning. A new beginning. Not just for the house, but for me. I'd fought for this place not out of spite or revenge, but because I understood its worth, its potential, its need to be preserved rather than transformed, just like I'd finally understood my own worth. Robert and Veronica had thought they were the heroes of their own love story, never realizing they were actually minor characters in a different tale altogether. A story about preservation, about justice, about a woman who refused to let anyone destroy what she valued most, whether it was a historical house or her own sense of self-worth. The Victorian mansion stood silent and strong around me, its century-old walls holding generations of stories. Now it would hold mine too. Not a story of revenge, but of redemption. Not of destruction, but of preservation. Not of loss, but of triumph. And as I finally headed upstairs to sleep in my new home, I smiled, knowing that some dreams were worth fighting for, some battles worth winning, and some victories sweetest when they came not from destroying something, but from saving it. 3 months after taking ownership of the Victorian mansion, I stood in the restored library, watching as a group of architecture students sketched the original woodwork. The Marshall Historical Foundation was already exceeding expectations, bringing new life and purpose to the house that had once been just a dream. The restoration is coming along beautifully, Brian commented, joining me by the window. The Historical Commission is using your project as a model for other preservation efforts in the city. I smiled, remembering how different this room had looked in Veronica's modernization plans. Now, instead of a sterile, minimal reading nook, it was a vibrant space where history lived and breathed. Have you heard the latest? Sophie asked, entering with a stack of local magazines. Veronica's design firm let her go. Apparently, the Thompson House scandal was the last straw. She's moved to another city to restart her career. I picked up one of the magazines. My restoration project was featured on the cover. And Robert? Still trying to salvage his reputation in the real estate community, Sophie replied. But, since everyone knows who really built your business now, the sound of footsteps on the grand staircase announced Margaret's arrival. The divorce is final, she said without preamble, holding up a folder. You are officially Elizabeth Marshall. Now, I'd chosen to take my grandmother's maiden name, leaving behind the last trace of my life as Elizabeth Thompson. It felt right, like the house itself had given me a new identity. Perfect timing, Sarah called from the doorway. The foundations. First educational program starts next week. Dad would have loved seeing all these young people learning about historical architecture. I watched the students working, their faces intent as they captured every detail of the room's ornate features. Each one had a story about what drew them to historical preservation. Each one understood what Veronica never had, that some things were worth protecting. Ms. Marshall? One of the students approached, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. Is it true that someone wanted to modernize this room? Remove all the original features? Yes, I replied, running my hand along the restored woodwork. They thought they could improve it by erasing its history. But why? She asked, genuine confusion in her voice. It's so beautiful as it is. Sometimes people confuse change with improvement, I said softly. They don't understand that real value isn't about being new or modern, but about being authentic. Later that afternoon, I hosted a tea for local Preservation Society members in the formal dining room. The crystal chandelier, which Veronica had planned to replace with something contemporary, sparkled above us, its original prisms casting rainbow reflections across the walls. You've done something remarkable here, an elderly woman told me, her eyes bright with appreciation. You haven't just preserved a house, you've given it new purpose. She was right. The Victorian mansion wasn't just a museum piece now. It was a living, breathing part of the community. Weekly tours introduced visitors to its history. Workshops taught traditional restoration techniques, and the Foundation's scholarship program helped train the next generation of preservationists. My phone buzzed with a message from Louisa. You need to see this. Robert's trying to pitch a modern development project across town. No one's buying it. They all want to know where the real business genius is. I set the phone aside, feeling no satisfaction in Robert's struggles. His choices had led him here just as mine had led me to this new life. The difference was, I had built something meaningful from the ashes of our marriage. As the afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows, I found myself in the music room, where a local artisan was carefully restoring the original ceiling medallion. This room had been slated for complete demolition in Veronica's plans. Now it would host monthly concerts, filling the house with the kind of life and culture its original builders had envisioned. Elizabeth? Sarah's voice pulled me from my thoughts. There's someone here you might want to meet. She led me to the front parlor, where an elderly man waited. This is James Marshall, my cousin, she explained. He grew up in this house in the 1950s. James's eyes were wet as he looked around the room. I was afraid, he admitted, when I heard the house had been sold. So many of these old places are being gutted, turned into something unrecognizable. But this, he gestured at the carefully restored details. This is exactly how I remember it. We spent the next hour listening to his stories, each one a testament to the life this house had witnessed. He spoke of Christmas mornings by the fireplace, summer evenings on the wraparound porch, family gatherings that had filled these rooms, with laughter and love. You know, he said as he prepared to leave, my grandfather used to say that houses have souls, that they know who truly belongs in them. I think he was right. That evening, as the sunset painted the house in shades of amber and gold, I sat in my favorite window seat in the library. The shelves were slowly filling with books on architecture and preservation. The reading tables now hosted study groups and research sessions, and the room hummed with the kind of purposeful energy its builders would have appreciated. Sophie found me there, a newspaper in her hand. Have you seen this? They're calling you a preservation pioneer. Your foundation's model is being adopted by other historical properties in the region. I took the paper, but my eyes were drawn to the house around us. Every room told a story now, not just of its past, but of its renewal. Every restored feature was a testament to the power of preservation over destruction, of understanding over ignorance. My phone lit up with a final message from Robert. I get it now. What this house meant to you. What I tried to take away. I'm sorry? I didn't respond. His understanding came too late, but it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about him, or Veronica, or even about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. The Victorian mansion stood proud in the gathering dusk, its windows glowing with warmth and purpose. In saving it, I had saved something in myself, the part that understood that true worth couldn't be measured in modern upgrades or contemporary designs, but in the ability to recognize and preserve what was genuinely valuable. Ready for tomorrow? Sophie asked. The first preservation workshop is fully booked. I smiled, thinking of all the people who would learn to see old houses the way I did. Not as outdated structures needing modernization, but as treasures waiting. To be preserved. You know, Sophie said softly, when you first told me about Robert and Veronica, I thought you were going to destroy them. But you did something better. You built something beautiful instead. She was right. In choosing preservation over destruction, I had written a different kind of story. Not a revenge tale, but a restoration story. Not just of a house, but of myself. And as night fell over the Victorian mansion, its rooms filled with the promise of tomorrow's activities, I knew that I had found something better than revenge. I had found purpose. I had found peace. I had found home. 1 year after taking ownership of the Victorian mansion, I stood on its wraparound porch, watching as the morning sun painted the city in shades of promise. The house had become everything I'd dreamed of and more, not just a home, but a beacon of preservation, education, and community. The sound of car doors closing drew my attention to the street, where the day's first visitors were arriving. Architecture students, preservation enthusiasts, and community members gathered regularly now, drawn by the Marshall Historical Foundation's programs and the house's carefully restored beauty. Ready for the big announcement? Sarah asked, joining me on the porch. Today, we would be revealing the Foundation's expansion plans. 3 more historical properties in the city would be brought under our protection, saved from the fate that had almost befallen this house. More than ready, I replied, thinking of how far we'd come. The house that Robert and Veronica had planned to gut and modernize had instead become a model for historical preservation across the region. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. Just drove past Robert's new condo. Very modern, very cold. Very Veronica. Except she's not there anymore. I'd heard through mutual friends that their relationship hadn't survived the aftermath of losing the house. Veronica had moved to another city, her reputation in the design community tarnished by the exposure of her previous renovation disasters. Robert had tried to rebuild his real estate empire, but without my business acumen behind him, he was struggling. Ms. Marshall? A young woman approached, clipboard in hand. The Historical Commission representatives are here for the presentation, and there's a reporter from Architectural Digest who'd like to interview you about the Foundation's success. Inside, the house hummed with activity. The library, once threatened with division and modernization, now hosted daily study groups and research sessions. The music room filled the house with classical concerts every weekend. The formal dining room had become a favorite venue for community gatherings and educational events. Elizabeth, Margaret called, making her way through the growing crowd. The paperwork for the new properties is ready. 3 more houses saved from demolition. I smiled, remembering our conversation a year ago when she'd asked if this was all about revenge. Back then, maybe part of it had been. But somewhere along the way, it had evolved into something far more meaningful. Have you seen the latest Preservation Society newsletter? Louisa asked, appearing with a magazine in hand. They're calling your foundation the gold standard for historical property restoration. Other cities are starting to adopt our model. The Front parlor filled with people as we prepared for the announcement. Through the crowd, I caught glimpses of the house's carefully restored features: the original woodwork that Veronica had planned to tear out, the stained glass windows that would have been replaced with modern fixtures, the ornate ceiling medallions that had been slated for destruction. Sarah stepped up to the podium we'd set up, her voice carrying across the room. A year ago, this house faced an uncertain future. Today, it stands as a testament to the power of preservation, to the understanding that some things are worth protecting. As she spoke, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. About the night I'd received Veronica's gloating text message, about the days of careful planning, about the moment of triumph when the house became mine. But more than that, I thought about the transformation that had followed. And now, Sarah continued, we're excited to announce the Foundation's expansion. 3 more historical properties will be preserved, restored, and opened to the community. The Marshall legacy of preservation continues to grow. Applause filled the room, but my attention was caught by a new message on my phone. From Robert. I drove by the house yesterday, saw all the people going in and out, saw what you've created. It's more beautiful than it ever would have been. With our plans. You were right. I didn't respond. His recognition didn't matter anymore. This house, this foundation, this purpose I'd found. They were no longer about proving him wrong. They were about proving preservation right. After the announcement, as people mingled and explored the house, I found myself back in the library. The afternoon sun through the stained glass windows created patterns on the floor that seemed to dance with life and possibility. You know, Brian from the Historical Commission said, joining me, when you first proposed turning this into a foundation, some people thought it was just an elaborate way to get back at your ex-husband. But you've created something extraordinary here. Something lasting. He was right. What had started as a battle for a house had become a mission to preserve history, to protect beauty, to create something meaningful from what others would have destroyed. The day wound down slowly, the house gradually emptying of visitors until only the core foundation team remained. We gathered in the formal dining room, where Margaret raised a glass and toast. To Elizabeth, she said, who showed us that the best revenge isn't about destroying something, but about creating something better in its place. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I walked through the quiet rooms of my home. Each space held memories now, not just of the past century, but of the past year, of students learning about architectural history, of artists studying preservation techniques, of community members discovering the value of their own historical homes. My phone lit up one last time, a message from Sarah. Dad would have been so proud of what you've done with the house. You didn't just save it, you gave it new life. Standing in the library, surrounded by books and history and possibility, I smiled. The woman who had received that devastating text message a year ago was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had learned that true victory wasn't about revenge or destruction. It was about preservation, of history, of beauty, of self-worth. It was about recognizing that some things were too valuable to be destroyed, too precious to be modernized, too important to be lost. The Victorian mansion stood proud and strong in the moonlight, its windows glowing with the promise of tomorrow's activities. It had become more than just my home, more than just a preserved historical property. It had become a symbol of transformation, of renewal, of the understanding that the best way to overcome destruction is to create something beautiful in its place. And as I closed up for the night, preparing for another day of teaching, preserving, and building something meaningful, I knew that I had found something far better than revenge. I had found my true purpose, my real legacy, my actual dream. Let Robert and Veronica live with their modern condos and contemporary designs. I had something far more valuable, a home with a soul, a foundation with a purpose, and a future built not on destroying the old, but on preserving what truly mattered. The best revenge, after all, isn't about tearing something down. It's about building something up, something lasting, something meaningful, something that transforms pain into purpose, betrayal into beauty, and loss into legacy. And that's exactly what I had done. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.